Hello, I am Padma Mallikarjunan. I am an Enterprise Support Manager at AWS, and I am based out of Austin, Texas. Welcome to AWS Knowledge Center Live, where we share best practices and troubleshooting tips from AWS Support. Joining me today is Matt Pye and Louise Fox from AWS. Can you give us a quick introduction, Matt and Louise?
Yeah, thanks, Padma. So I'm Matt Pye. I'm a AWS support manager based out of Dublin, and I manage a team of security engineers within the AWS support team, one of which is Louise.
Hi everyone, I'm Louise and I'm a cloud support engineer based out of Dublin. I'm part of the security team within cloud support, supporting engineers or customers on their security services.
Thank you for joining us from across time zones. Everyone, today we will be introducing to you some of our AWS security services. We will specifically focus on best practices while using those services. Before we get into the details, a quick note to our attendees online. Please use the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen to share your questions and share your thoughts throughout the episode. We look forward to hearing from you. Matt, can you walk us through what you're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so today, Louise and I are going to be taking you through an introduction into the AWS security design principles, as well as taking you through at a high level some of the security services, as well as some of the security features of our other AWS services. For this, we're going to be going through the 5 pillars of cloud security, which are identity and access management, detective controls, infrastructure protection, data protection, and incident response. Louise is also going to take you through a demo later on. But as Padma said, if you do have any questions or you like any more information on a topic, please do type it into the chat and we'll do our best to answer them throughout. But first, it's important to understand the AWS shared responsibility model, as this defines the responsibility of AWS and the responsibility of our customers. AWS is responsible for protecting the infrastructure that runs all of the AWS services offered in AWS Cloud. The infrastructure is composed of the hardware, software, networking, and the facilities that run the AWS services. As a customer, your responsibility will be determined by the AWS services that you select. This determines the amount of configuration you must perform as part of the security responsibilities. For example, if you deploy an Amazon EC2 instance, you are responsible for the management of the guest operating system upwards, which includes all the updates, the security patches, any applications and software you actually install on the EC2 instance, and also the security groups, which is the AWS provided firewall on each of these instances. But as well as the shared responsibility model, it is good to just understand compliance as well. We do have a free self-service portal called AWS Artifact. This is where you can actually download compliance reports and agreements on demand. I've seen many customers creating AWS support cases asking if the AWS service that they're using in the environment is compliant with GDPR or HIPAA, for example. We have links that provides all the list of AWS services that are in scope with AWS compliance assurance programs, and we're always adding to this list as well, so it's important to kind of keep that bookmarked. We also have a dedicated compliance team that you can reach out directly, which we'll put into the chat later on. Well, I'll let Louise go on about the design principles for security that we kind of talked about in the introduction.
Thank you, Matt. So in the cloud, there are several principles that help you strengthen your system security. In AWS, these are known as the design principles. So first one is implement a strong identity foundation. So this would include implementing the principle, the security best practice of principle of least privilege. So rather than giving your users full access to everything in your account, instead you should only be granting access to exactly what's needed for them to carry out their daily tasks. So with our service, AWS Identity and Access Management, you can have your users have policies attached for specific access to a particular service, whether it's full access to that service, read-only access, or you can have custom-based policies as well, where you can grant access to specific resources. So we also have enforced separation of duties, which would fall under a strong identity foundation. And this would involve separating credentials for different jobs within your environment. So for example, if you had an auditing team that would need access to maybe your storage services, and you also had a database developer team, you could grant read-only access to those specific storage services for your auditing team. And then you could grant full access to a specific database for your database developer team. And then this would mean that your auditing team would only be able to read the service that they need, and they would not be able to make any modifications or deletions to your databases. Another that would fall under that would be enforced separation of duties. So this is where you'd have separate, enforce multi-factor authentication, MFA, for all of your users. So this is where whenever your users log into the console, they're going to have a username and password, which basically gives them the keys to the kingdom. However, if these ever got lost or leaked, then it poses a security risk, as somebody else could gain access maliciously. So instead, by enforcing MFA, your users are going to have their username and password, which is something that they know, and then also their MFA token that would generate one-time passwords, which would be something that they have. So it's just that additional layer of security on your account. Also, there would be the use of short-term credentials where possible is highly recommended.
So, Louise, just stop you there. You mentioned about short-term credentials. Can you just give us a brief explanation of what you mean by short-term credentials and how can we use them in AWS?
Sure. So these would be limited privilege credentials that you don't need to store, and they will expire after a specific amount of time. So within AWS, we have IAM roles. You can create a role and you can assign different permissions to each role. Then a user will be able to assume these roles to carry out those tasks. So as well as AWS credentials, users can authenticate into roles using federations such as single sign-on or a SAML. And not just users, but actually also you can have applications or services assume roles. So maybe your EC2 instance, you can have a role assigned to your EC2 instance, and then that application will be able to carry out tasks on your behalf. So yeah, the next one then would be enable traceability. So even with a strong identity foundation in place, logging all activity in your environment is still very important to know just basically who's doing what in your account, whether it's for auditing or troubleshooting purposes, or in case of maybe a security breach. So AWS offers many monitoring and logging services to log all API activity, configuration changes to your resources, IP traffic coming in and out of your network, and much more, all in real time. So you can integrate these logs with systems to automatically respond and take action. For example, you can apply automation to different events using Amazon CloudWatch, or you could set up notifications for different type of logs using Amazon SNS. Another would be apply security at all layers. So applying a defense in depth approach would be another security best practice that we'd recommend. Rather than just focusing on the protection of a single outer layer, apply security to all layers: your edge network, your virtual private cloud, subnet, load balancer, every instance, operating system, application layer. This goes on. But yeah, AWS offers many different types of services and features with multiple security controls, so that when you build your secure applications, you can build them as secure as you want. Automate security best practices. So this would be to improve your ability to securely scale more rapidly and cost effectively. So implementing maybe an alarm system to notify you when needed, automate appropriate actions to specific events wherever possible. Protect data in transit and at rest. So always secure your data to prevent any data leaks, malicious access, or human error. So use encryption, tokenization, and access control where appropriate.
So, Louise, we have over 175 different AWS services. What type of service would you use to encrypt your data, or what services would you actually recommend our customers use?
So although Amazon S3 is a storage service, it has many built-in security features to secure data at rest, including different encryption methods, access control to specify who has access to your data and what they're authorized to do with it. So that might be bucket policies or access control lists, and also versioning or MFA delete, which means a second factor of authentication is required to delete your data just to ensure that it's not accidental. We'll go into more on those in our demo later on S3. There's also AWS Key Management Service and Cloud HSM to encrypt your data and store it securely to prevent any unauthorized access. And also Amazon Certificate Manager is our service that offers free SSL certificates to protect your data in transit, over the internet, or in your internal infrastructure, and also to ensure the integrity of data as well. So the next will be keep people away from data. So this just reduces the risk of human error when handling sensitive data. It reduces or eliminates the need for manual processing of data. So just keep your server and database snapshots secure and encrypted wherever possible. And lastly, prepare for security events. So always prepare for an incident by having an incident management and investigation processes in place that align with your organizational requirements.
So, Louise, let me just stop you there again. So I see that a lot of customers are being very reactive when a security event or issue happens, but you mentioned there about always be prepared. How can you prepare for security incidents in advance?
You can prepare for any types of potential incidents by applying automation where possible, having alarming set up for different types of events to notify you, logging and monitoring in place to find the root cause of the incident, and perform a post-incident analysis as well to prevent any other similar event from reoccurring in the future. You can also stay prepared by holding game days, testing different processes and applications within your environment, just to ensure that everything is working as planned. So as we always say, always be paranoid whenever it comes to preparing for security events. So our next slide here. So here are the 5 pillars and the different security services that can be used to achieve security for each pillar. So this slide shows our security services. However, we also have many AWS services that are not listed here that have embedded security features. For example, S3 would have encryption and logging. Our CDN service CloudFront would have DDoS mitigation and error pages, SSL. So we'll discuss these as well later on today.
So with some of the services here, there's services that are in multiple pillars. Services like AWS config rules, which is in incident response. We've also got config in another pillar as well. Same with VPC flow logs and VPC. So would you be able to give a quick explanation about why you have services in multiple pillars?
Yeah, so most of the services listed here are not specific to just one pillar, and they can be used interchangeably between the pillars. So Matt, like you said, as you can see, AWS config is mentioned in the detective controls, as it's used to monitor and log all configuration changes made to your resources. But it is then also mentioned in the incident response pillar because AWS config rules can be used to automatically remediate configuration changes to your resources if they do not comply with the rule that you've specified. And in regard to VPCs, so another example was VPC Virtual Private Cloud. It's mentioned in the infrastructure protection pillar because it has security groups and network access control lists that can be applied to control and manage which traffic is allowed to access the resources within your VPC. It's also mentioned in the detective controls pillar because you can enable VPC flow logs, which would log all IP traffic going in and out of your VPC. So we'll be discussing all of these services in more detail throughout the session and in our demo. So the first pillar, we'll go into more detail, is on identity and access management. So identity and access management are key parts of an information security program, ensuring that only authorized and authenticated users are able to access your resources and only in a manner that you intend. So with this, we have many best practices which we encourage our customers to implement, such as granting least privilege access, protecting AWS credentials, and using multi-factor authentication, MFA. So we have the AWS Identity and Access Management Service, IAM, which is completely free, it's easy to use, and it allows you to create users, roles, groups, and policies. We'll be going into more detail on this later on in the demo. Also, we have AWS STS, Security Token Service. So this ties in with IAM, where you can avoid storing user credentials and instead request temporary limited privilege credentials for authentication using IAM roles, which could be more secure, would be more secure, and ties in with our AWS best practices as well, as I mentioned earlier. So this is actually a benefit as well of AWS Trusted Advisor, another service we have for support, where it actually checks, it has multiple IAM checks. So it checks and notifies you if your users do not have MFA enabled, if they've not rotated their access keys within a specific number of days, or if their access keys have been exposed, which would pose as a malicious risk basically to your account. So I'd recommend utilizing the full capacity of IAM to meet it helps meet the best practices of granting least privilege, separation of duties, password policies, and your overall account compliance, and of course it's free. As well as this, another free service we have that's also fantastic, AWS Organizations. So this is not just for consolidating billing receipts for your organization, but it can also be used to manage security permissions at an account level. So you can apply service control policies, which are a type of policy, to your organizational units or to specific accounts.
Okay, so just as we kind of move on to the next slide, Padma, is any questions coming from the chat?
Thank you, Matt and Louise, for sharing that information. Yes, we do have questions on the chat window. Matt, I will go to you first, and then Louise, I'll circle back with you for the next question about the AWS Network Firewall. So thank you for your question here, Mr. Builder 10, and welcome back. So the question is, could my customers access secure SOC 1 reports on AWS? Matt, can you take that question?
Yeah, so that'll be kind of more related to compliance, and I kind of mentioned a bit earlier about the compliance we have where customers can get more information. So you can actually go to a link which Padma actually shared earlier, which actually shows all of the services in scope for compliance, as well as a team dedicated, so you can actually reach out to any time that you can ask specific compliance questions. So I see questions like this coming to AWS Support quite often, and the advice we give to all customers is actually reach out to our dedicated compliance team with the link, which I'll provide again in the chat, which you can actually kind of utilize to speak to the team.
Just to add to Matt as well, it's not only just the SOC 1 report, but also you can access the SOC 2 report, and the SOC 3 report is publicly available then.
Thank you for that. Next question here from R. Schumann. Thank you for asking your question. The question is, can you elaborate a bit about the AWS Network Firewall? How does it fit here? And I think this question is in relation to the earlier slide where you were talking about all the AWS services in scope.
I think I mentioned firewall when I was discussing the virtual private cloud. So whenever you have your virtual private cloud, you're able to define access control for it using security groups, which would apply to your EC2 instances, and then also access control lists, which will apply to the subnets within your virtual private cloud. So you can actually log traffic of which IP addresses are going in and out of your network firewall. And you can actually block or allow traffic depending on what your use case is.
Got it. Thank you.
One thing I'd just like to add to that, Padma, is not just be reliant on one layer. As Louise mentioned earlier about defense in depth, don't just rely on one layer. There's a lot of layers where you can actually add protection.
Thank you for the insight, Louise and Matt. The next question here is about EFS and I think VPC. The question is from Sego Asu. The question is, my customer wants to use EFS between two, I think the word there is VPC and not PVC. So how can I use EFS between two VPCs? Any comments on that?
By EFS, do you mean Elastic File System, is it?
I think so, yes.
Is it that he wants to share files between two VPCs?
So Sego, can you respond back to us on the chat window with that question from Louise, and we will take it at our next question break.
We do have VPC peering, if that's what you're referring to, where you can actually share resources and communicate between two VPCs. We also have other services such as resource sharing, where you can share resources between different accounts within your organization, or you can specify an account.
Got it. Let me post the links also to VPC peering and resource sharing on the chat window. And everyone, thank you so much for your questions. Keep them coming in, and we will review them again during the next question break. Over to you, Louise and Matt.
Thank you. So the second pillar is detective controls. So you can use detective controls to identify any potential security threat or incident. So our key AWS service for this that captures these events will be AWS CloudTrail, which provides detailed logs about API calls made in your account, such as username, resource IDs, source IP address, etc. So you can create trails to log specific regions or to log all events globally. You can then use a service like Amazon Athena that can be used to analyze these logs to help you identify trends and further isolate activity by attribute, by access key, whatever you like. So we also have AWS Config is great service for tracking your AWS resource configuration changes to enable security and governance. So you can set up config rules to notify you or automatically remediate any changes made to your resources, which will go under the detective and incident response pillar, as we mentioned earlier.
So with this, I see a lot of actually customers coming into AWS Support asking whether they should use CloudTrail or Config. What do you recommend customers use?
So as I mentioned, CloudTrail is a logging service that records all API calls to any AWS service, and the logs will tell you more information about the event, such as which user or application made the call, when it was made, and what IP address it was made from. AWS Config, on the other hand, lets you set certain configuration rules that you'd like your AWS resources to comply with, and it tracks whether your resources comply with those rules. So every time a resource is changed, Config records the change in an S3 bucket. So although they are both logging and monitoring services, Config reports on what has changed, whereas CloudTrail reports on who made the change, when, and from what location. So they actually work very well together. While Config is a great starting point to find out what happened to your AWS resources, you can get the full picture by digging into the CloudTrail logs too, because you'd be able to correlate the resource IDs or timestamps. So together, Config and CloudTrail are actually a very powerful combination if you want to secure your application in the cloud and gain deeper visibility into performance and troubleshoot issues faster. So I'd actually recommend definitely using both of them. We also have Amazon GuardDuty, which is our managed threat detection service that continuously monitors for malicious or unauthorized behavior to help you protect your AWS accounts and workloads. So you can receive findings for your different resources organized by severity, and these findings can trigger AWS Lambda for automated remediation or prevention. So the next here is infrastructure protection. So infrastructure protection ensures that systems and services you're using are protected against any unintended or unauthorized access or potential vulnerabilities. So we have Amazon VPC, Virtual Private Cloud, which you mentioned earlier. So this can reduce surface area for attacks by supporting the protection of network and host level boundaries. So this service gives you the ability to create your own virtual private network on AWS and then deploy your own security configurations, as we mentioned earlier, using security groups, access control lists, etc. We also have AWS Shield, which is our managed DDoS protection service, and this safeguards web applications running on AWS. So there's Shield standard, which is free for all customers and automatically enabled by default in your account. It protects against layer 3 and layer 4 attacks, so SYN flood attacks, UDP flood attacks, reflection attacks, things like that. As well as this, then we have Shield Advanced, which is an enhanced level of security, and it can be applied to your whole organization. So all accounts within the organization will get the benefit of it. It protects against layer 7 attacks, such as HTTP flood attacks, DNS query attacks, and it has advanced attack mitigation techniques. As well as that, sorry, it also, with Shield Advanced, there's 24/7 access to the DDoS response team whenever a DDoS attack is detected. There's also DDoS cost protection, meaning that any scaling charges resulting from DDoS-related usage spikes, you can claim back in service credits. And then with AWS Shield, you can also take advantage of AWS Web Application Firewall, so WAF. This is where you can deploy rules that help you protect your web application from common web exploits that could affect application availability, compromise security, or consume excessive resources. So you can use these rules to block malicious IP address ranges, you can block regions, you can prevent SQL injection attacks, cross-site scripting attacks, things like that.
So Louise, with over 175 different AWS services, are there any other services that you'd recommend customers to use to mitigate against DDoS attacks?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's Shield, there's WAF, Web Application Firewall, but as well as that, we do have other services that wouldn't actually be security services, but they would have built-in security functionalities. So for example, our DNS service, Route 53, this would mitigate complex attacks by allowing only the most reliable DNS queries. We also have our CDN service, CloudFront. This has globally distributed attack mitigation capabilities and a very robust reverse proxy. So it also has a SYN proxy feature that verifies a three-way handshake before passing it to the application, which would mitigate any SYN flood attacks. There's also our load balancing service, Elastic Load Balancer, and this can help scale out to absorb any forms of DDoS attacks, meaning that you'll be able to spread the load of any potential DDoS attack so that your site or application won't go down in the event of it. So next we have data protection. So here we have some of our security services related to data protection. As data protection is actually so broad, we've broken this up into sections of its own. So I'll actually go to the next slide where we'll actually discuss these security services in more detail. So here we have data classification. So for this, we would have the service AWS Resource Tagging, where you can apply custom defined tags for resources and group these together. We also have Amazon Macy, which discovers sensitive data at scale. So Macy applies machine learning and pattern matching techniques to the S3 buckets you select to identify and alert you of any sensitive data, such as personally identifiable information or PCI data. So basically, if you're storing any information about your customers or any financial data, such as maybe card information, Macy will be able to alert you of that. And this would help you and your customers remain compliant and protect against sensitive data. So this works on one account, or it can work on all of the accounts within your organization. We also have encryption and tokenization. So our main encryption service, as I mentioned before, AWS Key Management Service, KMS. So this is for when you want to encrypt your data. KMS makes it really easy for you to create, control, and use encryption keys as an additional layer of security. You can also apply key policies to control who has access to specific keys. These would be resource-based policies, and in our demo later, we'll actually go through creating a key and checking out the key policy as well.
So, Louise, just to kind of stop you there, you mentioned about Cloud HSM, and you've talked about KMS, both encryption services. So what encryption service do you actually recommend customers use?
That's actually a good question. So our other encryption service, Cloud HSM, this is a hardware security module for managing keys, and it can also perform cryptographic operations as well within the HSM. So I guess it really depends on the customer's use case. KMS costs less, and it can be integrated with many of the AWS services, such as our storage service, Amazon S3, Amazon Certificate Manager, AWS CloudTrail for logging. However, your KMS keys are on a shared hardware tenancy, which means that your keys are on their own partition of an encryption module shared with other AWS customers, each with their own isolated partition. However, Cloud HSM gives you your own hardware modules. So it's the main reason that you would choose Cloud HSM is if you want to ensure that your keys were isolated on their own encryption module for compliance purposes mainly. We also have protecting data at rest. So this brings us back to AWS Key Management Service again. As I mentioned, it's our managed key service. It integrates with other AWS services. So it can be used with S3, EBS, and Glacier, our storage services, to encrypt data while it's being stored at rest. For protecting data in transit, this would be TLS would be used to encrypt sensitive data in transit, which brings me to our managed certificate service called Amazon Certificate Manager, ACM. So with ACM, you can request SSL certificates free of charge to establish encrypted transport between systems and services. So ACM integrates with our Elastic Load Balancing Service, ELB, so you can support secure connections such as HTTPS, and also with our CDN service, CloudFront, so it supports encrypted endpoints for your global content distributions. We also have ACM Private Certificate Authority, which allows you to issue private certificates to verify identities and secure communications for your internal infrastructure and for your private networks. So certificates issued by private CA, and they would only be trusted within your organizational infrastructure and not on the internet. Oh, and lastly, data backup, replication, and recovery. So the key AWS service that supports data backup, replication, and recovery would be S3 and EBS. So some of the functionalities offered by S3 that makes it good for data backup and replication and recovery would be, we have cross-region replication. This acts as a mirror, so whenever you're uploading data to a bucket in a region, this data would be simultaneously uploaded to a bucket in another region. So it's great for disaster recovery. We also have lifecycle policies where you can transition data to various storage classes. For example, you can use archival storage, such as Amazon Glacier, just for cost efficiency. There's also versioning, where you'd have different versions of the same data so that you can make any changes and very easily retrace your steps and revert back. Again, we'll go into more on this as well in the S3 demo, where we're actually going to go through some of these security built-in features. Oh, also, there's Amazon EBS, which would have incremental backups for your volumes that are attached to your EC2 instances, which would be good for data backup as well.
So let's just take a quick breakdown, go to Padma. Padma, is there any questions coming up from the chat?
Hi, Matt. Yes, we do have some questions on the chat window. Thank you for posting your questions, everyone. So the first question here is about Amazon SageMaker Notebook. And I think this might require a deep dive, but the question is, thank you, DJ Wallier, for your question. Um, do we know, it seems like they have a SageMaker Notebook instance and the security group associated with that is deleted every 7 days. I would recommend using the forums to ask this question, as this might require a deep dive.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Padma. This would actually require diving in to finding what's going on. But what you could actually do as a customer is kind of look at CloudTrail logs. There's a number of other services that could actually help you to kind of troubleshoot yourself. Louise, do you want to go through any other kind of services that could help in to detect an issue like this, or to kind of go back and review an issue like this?
Well, this will fit into what I was saying in the design principles, where if possible, you should set up logging to basically notice these kind of events. You can have notifications for them, and if possible, you'd be able to automate this so that it could actually remediate itself. I'm not sure what services will be integrated with SageMaker, so it's hard to actually recommend them. But Padma, if you could throw in a link on SageMaker there and integrated services if possible, that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, but as Padma mentioned, if you enter this into the AWS forums, we'll be able to actually dive deeper into this and hopefully be able to get to a resolution for you.
Got it. Thank you. The next question, multiple follow-up questions on this. This is about CloudFormation and what help we have in implementing some of the best practices that you discussed here. So questions from Crypto36KR, follow-up questions from Drew Clayman, and also MSSLXX. Lots of follow-up questions. Basically, is there a CloudFormation quick start that will help us achieve these well-architected best practices?
One thing I would recommend is we do actually have a free tool, which is the well-architected tool. This is a tool which helps you to review the state of your workloads and compares them to the latest AWS architectural best practices. This tool gives you free architectural guidance. It reviews your kind of workloads consistently, and it identifies and implements any improvements for you. This can help you when looking at the system and your team is building, and asking yourself, are you well architected? So how do you know if your team is following the best practices or what the risks are in your architecture? This tool can kind of help you with that. So this is one thing I'd really recommend for customers to use. Again, it is a free tool, so do use it, and it actually follows the kind of best practices and well-architected frameworks.
Got it. Thank you for that insight, Matt. And I also want to thank MSSLXX for your insight on using the AWS Cloud Development Kit as an additional guidance. I will post the link to that on the chat window. And I'll also post a link to the AWS blogs on the well-architected tool. Some of our blogs do contain some CloudFormation that you can use depending on your business needs. So thank you for the questions and the feedback. And also additional question from Drew Clayman, want to quickly address before we switch over and show you a great demo we have built for you. This question we have from Drew Clayman is, are these slides publicly available for download? We do post our episodes on the Twitch or on our playlist. So thank you, David, for posting the link. But this is really good feedback for us, Drew. Keep that feedback coming in. So thank you for that question. With that, I'm going to turn this over to you, Matt and Louise, for the rest of the show.
Great. So the last pillar that we'll be discussing is the incident response pillar. So this is for automating a response or mitigation to any unplanned interruption in your environment. So even with extremely mature preventative and detective controls, your organization should still put processes in place to respond to and mitigate any potential impact of security incidents. So this will help you ensure that your architecture can accommodate investigation and recovery as quickly as possible. So we have AWS config rules, which you mentioned previously, and it can be used in response to an incident by auto-remediating changes in your environment, such as isolating resources, enriching events with additional data, or restoring configuration to a known good state. Another would be CloudWatch events to trigger different automated actions from changes in AWS resources, including CloudTrail, and you can also have a CloudWatch event to trigger notifications to keep you informed. If there's any, also AWS Lambda would be another one. So this can be used to scale out automatically and run code in response to any incidents. So yeah, we'll move on to the demo. 2 seconds there. Okay, you can. Is it playing? Sorry for this small interruption. Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. I would have told a joke, but I'm not that funny. Okay, so this is our demo on IAM, S3, and KMS. So first we're going to create an IAM user. As you can see here in the left panel, there's users and there's roles. So roles are similar to users, except that they have permission policies so they're similar that they have permission policies, but instead of being uniquely associated with one person, a role can be assumed by anyone. So it doesn't have long-term credentials such as a password or access keys. Instead, you can assume a role and it provides you with temporary credentials. So for this demo, we are going to click on users and go to create user. Just putting in a username that has to be unique within your account, and then access type. So here you can select programmatic access or console access. So programmatic access would be enabling an access key ID and a secret access key so that you can access the CLI or SDK, and then console access is enabling a password so a user can log in using a username and password. The password can be auto-generated, which I would recommend as it's more secure because the administrator who's creating the user won't know the password. And then there's also custom password if you wanted to put in your own password as well. And obviously this should comply with the password policy as well of the account. So then down below you can require a password reset, which means that the user will be prompted to put in their own password when they next go to log in. And if you check the box for this, then this policy here, IAM user change password policy, is going to be added to your user so that they have the ability to change the password. So next we go to permissions. And here you can add your user to a group if you like. So a group lets you specify permissions for multiple users, which can just make it easier to manage your permissions for those users. So if I wanted, I could add my users to admin group, and that will give my users administrator access. Also down here is the permission boundary. So this is an advanced feature of IAM that limits the maximum permissions for a user or a role. So for example, if your user had admin permissions, but you set a permission boundary that they could only have S3 permissions, they will only be able to have S3 permissions because that's all that you've allowed. So it's just an additional security thing there. Attach an existing policy directly. So as you can see here, there's custom managed policies and there is AWS managed policies. And these are a type of identity-based policy. So AWS managed policies are managed by AWS and created by AWS, and you're more than welcome to attach one of those to your users, and they're already predefined. Or else a customer managed policy would be if your use case is more specific, if you want to create an exact policy for different services or resources, you can add that there. So just for the sake of principle of least privilege, I'm going to attach S3 full access. As you can see here, it's a JSON policy with full access to all of the S3 APIs. So next onto tags, if you'd like to add a tag, you're more than welcome to. And now review. So just checking here, our access type is programmatic access and AWS managed console access, auto-generated password, no permission boundary set, and the two policies that we've attached. The second one because I prompted the user to create a new password when they first log in. So you can click create user and the user will be created within seconds. So here we go. This is all of the information on your new user, and if you are creating the user to send it to someone, you can actually just click send email and that can go straight to somebody. So it's very secure. Next, we're going to move on to S3, our storage service that we mentioned. So here we can go and create a bucket. So add in a bucket name there, and bucket names need to be globally unique. So not just unique within your bucket, globally unique. You can choose the region. So even though the name is globally unique, the bucket is actually regional. So bucket settings for block public access. So they're currently the checked, which means that the bucket is private. But if you did want to uncheck this, you could make your bucket public if you wish. Just as an extra step in security, if you do uncheck this, you're going to see just an extra thing down here, just a warning. Turning off your bucket, turning off block public access might result in this bucket and objects becoming public. So you just have to acknowledge that if you did want to do that. There are certain use cases where you might want to make the content of your bucket public, but for right now, we don't. So I'm just going to check that back. There's also bucket versioning. So this is keeping multiple versions of all of your objects. It's great for rolling back or recovering from any user accidental deletions or misconfigurations or any application failures. So we're going to enable that. Default encryption. So this is to encrypt objects in your S3 bucket. So I'm going to click enable here, and you're going to see different types of encryption. So there's Amazon S3 server-side encryption, which is free to use, and it automatically encrypts your data and it automatically decrypts your data on download. There's also AWS Key Management Service, so KMS key, as we discussed earlier, and you can use a managed key or you can choose your own master key as well. So we're actually going to go ahead and create a KMS key, and then we can add this to encrypt our bucket and the contents of our bucket. So by clicking the Create Key button, this opened up a new tab for us. And I'm going to select Symmetric Key because Amazon S3 only supports symmetric keys right now. And then you have the option here of using KMS, using external, which would be imported key material, or Cloud HSM. So entering in a name for the key. Again, has to be unique within your account as well. So this is where we define the key administrators, so who has permission to administer the key. So for this, I'm just going to check, let's say admin and admin CLI, because I know that they have admin permissions. And key deletion, allow key administrators to delete the key. I'm going to say no, which means only the root user can delete this key. So next, who has access to use the key? So we're going to use our new user, KC Live 2020, that we just created. And now this user will only be able to use the key to decrypt it and all that. And there we go, voila. So AWS has now created a key policy for us, a resource-based policy. As you can see here, the root has full permission to the key, which is our root user. Then admin CLI and admin are the key administrators, and they have all these different permissions: create, describe, modify key, delete key, or not delete key, sorry. And then the user that we created can encrypt and decrypt the key. And down here, they can also create grants, which means that they can associate this a service with another service, and it will be encrypted by the KMS key. So there we go. There's the key there now. And we're going to copy the key ARN that was just created, and we're going to put it in here. Oh, sorry, just to show you this as well. You can also enable key rotation if you like. That's the cryptographic configuration information about the key. So there we go. I just pasted in the new key that we just created back into S3 bucket again. So advanced settings, object lock. This is where you can lock objects to prevent any deletion or overwriting of the objects for a specific amount of time. It's usually used for compliance reasons. So we're going to create that. Oh, and look, I already took that bucket name, maybe in a practice run or someone else took it. So again, globally unique names. There we go. We'll create the bucket, and this will also be done in seconds. So that's been created. We're now going to go look for that. And here is our bucket that we just created. So going into properties, bucket versioning is enabled. There's also MFA delete, which I mentioned earlier, which is the additional layer of security where MFA is required to delete any objects within your bucket, just to ensure that there's no accidental deletions or anything like that. Default encryption, as you can see, that's using KMS encryption. It's using the key that we just created. Server access logging. This is another type of logging that you can enable, and it logs all requests made to your bucket. It's free to log, and you just pay for the storage of the logs. So I'm going to enable that just because this is a security tutorial. Event notification, CloudTrail data events. This is another type of logging that we mentioned earlier, and data events will log all object level APIs. Event notifications, you can use CloudWatch here, and you can actually set up notifications for events. Yeah, we also have the permissions tab. So this is where block all public access is turned on, which is the way we want it. So that means that all of the objects in the bucket are secure. A bucket policy can be added here, which is another type of resource-based policy where you can define who has access to your bucket and what access they have. So that would be a JSON format policy. And we can send in some links into the chat on bucket policies there for you. Object owner, you can decide, does the owner own the object or does the bucket own it? And access control list. So this is more specific again, where you can actually define who has access to specific objects within the bucket as well. And also how much access they have, whether it's read-only access, write access, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's the demo. Thank you very much.
So Padma, I'm not sure if we have any more time. I know time is getting close now.
Yeah, thank you, Louise and Matt, for the detailed demo. I just wanted to address one more question that we have from Crypto36KR, guard duty and support for other cloud provider data. I posted a link on the chat window, which will give you additional information for Amazon Guard Duty and the partners it integrates with. So Guard Duty continuously monitors and identifies the network activity within the AWS environment. And the list following that link will give you the technology partners that they integrate with. But with that, I think we are at the end of the show. And I thank you all for your questions and your engagement. If there were any questions that were not answered today, please post them on forums.aws.amazon.com and email us feedback. We want to hear from you. email us at kc-live@amazon.com. Thank you for joining us today at AWS Knowledge Center Live, and happy cloud computing.